What I think we're going to find as we open the scriptures today, as we read the story of Easter, is we're going to find ourselves in that story. No matter what we think, no matter what we believe, no matter what we walked into this room feeling, experiencing, living through in our lives, we're going to find ourselves in the Easter story this morning. Because whether you realize it or not, the Easter story is the story of life. And the Gospels do such a great job of revealing the humanness of our doubts, our struggles, our hurts, our pains, our grief, and anything else that you can think of that you might be walking through. Over the last few weeks, we've been talking about the miraculous, things that happen in our lives that we might not think of as miraculous. We might think that they're just kind of chance, but if we look at them a different way, we see that God shows up in all of our lives in unique ways. And maybe we just need different lenses. Maybe we just need different eyes to see. Maybe we just need to experience living water. Maybe we just need to experience God in a unique and different way. To see that God is always at work in our lives, that God is always at work in our world, that God is doing miraculous things all around us. And as we come together to celebrate Resurrection Sunday, the greatest of all miracles, the one that set the standard. In fact, C.S. Lewis, who was an incredible theologian. I know C.S. Lewis is kind of famous for writing books about Narnia, but C.S. Lewis was a brilliant theologian. He said this about this day. He says, the miracle of the resurrection and the theology of that miracle comes first and foremost. This is the greatest miracle of all times, and it allows us to experience anything else that we might point to and say, that's miraculous. The biography comes later as a comment on it. In other words, the whole of the scriptures, the whole of our lives, everything points to this moment here today that we come to celebrate. Everything points to the resurrection. And for some of us in this room, it would take a miracle for us to really experience resurrection in our lives. Over the last weeks, we've been saying that time and time again. It would take a miracle. It would take a miracle. It would take a miracle. We feel like this is our place that we live in so much in our world. That we don't see all of our lives as commentary on the resurrection. We see all of our lives as commentary on death. It would take a miracle for us to see beyond some of the brokenness, some of the struggle, some of the hurt that we carried into this room. But when we read the Gospels again, we find that something different happens. Most of us don't necessarily expect a miracle. We expect the worst. In fact, a recent study says that a majority of adults in the United States, 62% surveyed at the end of last year, say that they believe that the world that their children will inherit will be worse than it is right now. To which I want to say, and what are you doing about it? But that's a story for another day. We'll get to that next week. How about that? That's a teaser. You like that? That's really good. 62% of people say that the world is getting worse. 83% of those during that same survey say that they look at the economic outlook as bleak, and it causes them stress. 75% have concerns that they'll be victims of violence or crime. We tend to expect the worst, and honestly, why wouldn't we? That has been most of our experience of the world, and it's really most of what we see out in the world. 90% of the news that we see in the world is negative. It's framed in a negative manner. And most people surveyed say that social media actually makes them more negative and has a negative impact on their view of the world. The Gospels tell a similar story. A story that we have no problem buying into, that Jesus was betrayed because we've all been betrayed. That Jesus was arrested, that Jesus was tried, and he didn't get a fair trial, and then after that he was crucified, and then they put him in a tomb, a place we've all been to. They put him in a graveyard. We've all experienced the searing pain of loss. But that's not the end of the story. In John chapter 20, we hear this story in this way. It says, early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark. While it was still dark. John wants us to really quickly connect this story to a bigger story. That in the beginning, there was darkness, and out of that darkness came light, possibility, potential, hope. John starts wanting us to think that this is not the end of the story, but he records the responses of these people who, like us, see the world in such a negative framework, see the difficulty, see the struggle, don't see beyond it. On the first day, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene, one of Jesus' followers, came to the tomb, and I don't know what she expected to see. I assume that she expected to see what all of us would expect to see, that Jesus was still in the tomb, that the dead man was still dead, because that's what dead people do. They stay dead. That's just what we know. That's what we know of the world. So she goes and she sees that the stone has been removed from the tomb, and so she runs and goes and gets Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, which if you're writing the book, you can call yourself whatever you want to, right? Someday I'm going to write a biography and it's going to be like the stud muffin, right? That's how. But John went with the disciple that Jesus loved. That's fine. That's fine. That's his choice. Author's prerogative. And she said to them, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have laid him. She doesn't say, hey, Jesus is risen. She doesn't say the tomb is empty, so everything is possible. She goes, no. So some grave robbers stole the body. They took him. We don't know who they is, but somebody, they took him. They did this. They made this happen. They took the body. Then Peter and the other disciple, the one who Jesus loved, set out and went towards the tomb. And if you didn't want to know that the Bible was like full of humanity, John wouldn't have included this part, but he does, as like a little bit of comic relief. The two were running together, but the other disciple, the disciple whom Jesus loved, outran Peter and reached the tomb first. Now, I know that this is not a miraculous thing, okay? And no one is going to be surprised wherever two or more men are gathered, there will be a competition. And someone has to win. But I love that for all of eternity, the scriptures tell the story of John being like, I'm faster than that guy. And there's lots of theories that theologians have as to why this was. They're like, oh, well, John was younger than Peter, which, it hurts my heart a little bit as I continue to age. I'm like, no. I can keep up with the young guys. I can't keep up with the young guys. John outruns him. He records this in the scriptures. He wants everybody to know that he's faster, that Peter might be the rock, but that rock doesn't roll very quick. And when he got there first, he bent down and looked in and saw that the linen wrappings were lying there. But he didn't go in. And then Simon Peter came, eventually, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been at Jesus' head not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in and saw and believed. And we're not sure what that means. We're not sure when it says that John went in and saw and believed. We're not sure what exactly he believed. Did he just believe that Mary had told them that somebody stole the body? We're not sure that he fully believes this, because then he records the reality that most of us live in each and every day. And if you came here with lots of doubts about this story today, don't worry. John recorded his own doubt. He saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. And then the disciples went home. Like no big party, no celebration. They don't have a church service, no Easter egg hunt for the kids. They just go home. Well, we're not sure what to do with this. I guess we'll just go back to a place where we understand things, where we can just kind of wall ourselves off, where we can lock ourselves up, where we can stay out of the fray, where we can not deal with what does this mean. We're just going to not talk about it. We're not going to deal with it. We're just going to go home. And for some of us this morning, like that's going to be our experience of Easter morning. We're going to leave this place. We're going to go on home. We're going to go on with our lives. We're not going to give this a consideration at all. We're not even going to think about what this might mean in the course of our lives. We're just going to go on. We're going to go to that family dinner. We're going to sit around the table. We're going to hear our crazy uncle talk about whatever thing he's talking about. We're just going to go home. We're just going to move on. We're not going to let this story impact us or change our lives. That's what the disciples do. They just go on home. But Mary stood there weeping outside the tomb. Mary stays behind. And as she wept, she bent over to look in the tomb. And we're not sure how long Mary stares at this tomb. I've often wondered about that. How long does Mary just stand there and stare at this tomb? The place of death. The place of no hope, the place of no possibility, the place that ends everything because dead people are dead and they stay dead. I wonder how long she stared into that tomb before she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. And they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" Like, probably sarcastically. Like, what are you so upset about? Like, because she didn't get it. They got it. She didn't get the joke. Woman, why are you weeping? What do you have to be worried about? She said to them, "They've taken my Lord, and I don't know where they've laid him." She goes back to the same thing. She keeps looking in the tomb. She keeps looking to death. She keeps looking to brokenness. She keeps looking to betrayal. She keeps looking to all of those things that we tend to focus our lives on. Look at this. When she said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" What are you looking for, Mary? Why are you here weeping? Like, we should be celebrating. I think the biggest struggle that we have as people is that, like, we've been to the Easter cantata where, like, Jesus comes walking out of the tomb, with the blue and the white and, flowing hair. Like, we've been to the Easter cantata, and all the disciples are lined up there, and they're like, "Yay, Jesus!" But that's not the story of the Scriptures. The story of our Scriptures is full of doubt and misunderstanding and not fully grasping what the resurrection means. Who are you looking for, Mary? Which is Jesus' way of saying, like, I'm right here. Right here. Death doesn't have the last word. I'm right here. But she doesn't see Jesus until she stops looking in the tomb and turns around towards the garden. Remember, we get this next line, thinking he was the gardener. John wants to make it very clear that God does something amazing, that God defeats death in a garden where we remember that death started in a garden. And when Mary stops focusing on death, when she stops focusing on all the negative things in the world, and she turns around and sees Jesus in the garden, it opens up a world of possibilities for us. All of a sudden, life has potential, possibility. There is hope in the world. When we turn around and see the garden, when we stop focusing everything on what's wrong, and we begin to see Jesus and the possibilities and the potential. Jesus says her name, Mary. She turned and said to him in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Don't hold on to me because you got work to do. I've not yet ascended to the Father, but Go to my brothers and sisters and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and to your Father, to my God and to your God. And Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, I have seen the Lord. And she said to them that he had said these things to her. And you know what the disciples did? Nothing. Nothing. They didn't get it. In fact, the story goes on. When it was evening on that day, that same day, Easter Sunday, right? It's the same day. The first day of the week, the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews. They had their doors locked because they were afraid. We live our lives focused on the tomb and focused on the fear that we all wrestle with. And when we turn around, see the garden, when we open the doors of our hearts, anything becomes possible. Jesus shows up in a locked house. Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you, which is a strange thing to say to these guys. Jesus, I wish he had a better line. Jesus shows up back from the dead. Last time they saw him, he was hanging on a cross, and they put him in a tomb, and he shows up, and he, I'm back, right? Here's Jesus. Or he could have just broken into a rap and been like, guess who's back? Back again. Jesus. Anyway, for all of you Eminem fans. Peace be with you. But this is the best way for him to address the disciples in this moment. Peace be with you. This is more than just hey, peace, hey, everybody calm down. This is a sense of wholeness and possibility and potential that all of us need to experience. Peace be with you, he says. And then he shows them his hands and his side. Jesus doesn't deny that there is pain in the world. Jesus doesn't deny that there is hurt in this world. All of us experience it. Jesus experienced it. And he showed the disciples that in the middle of that hurt and the pain, that's when Jesus shows up. And what he says to us should change the way that we see the world. Peace be with you. He showed them his hands and his side, and then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. They finally saw him. For those of you who were with us a few weeks ago when we talked about these different words for seeing, this is that oreo or Oreo. Oreo. They really saw him. They understood that it was truly Jesus, the resurrected Jesus. And then they rejoiced. I think so often we spend so much time focused on the tomb and focused on the fear that we miss the opportunity to experience more. We miss the opportunity to experience redemption and resurrection and wholeness and peace. And Easter promises us that there is more to the story than just death. The tomb is empty, not because somebody stole Jesus. The tomb is empty so that our lives can be full. But we tend to keep staring at the tomb, to keep our eyes focused on the tomb. And Jesus wants to do miraculous things in our lives. Jesus wants to show up. Jesus invites us to turn from our focus from what's wrong with the world to the focusing on the possibility that exists in the world. Because Jesus is alive. Jesus is on the loose. And he's doing amazing things, miraculous things. And some of us, we walk in here and we don't necessarily believe in miracles. We don't necessarily believe that God is doing amazing works in the world. We don't necessarily attribute some of the incredible things that we see to God. But look, I have seen it. And some of you have too. I've seen the miraculous work of God. I've seen resurrection take place in people's lives. I've seen it in some of your lives. I've seen it in some of the lives of this church. I've seen it in the life of this community. New life coming out. New life coming out of broken, dead places. I've seen it time and time again. I've seen it in Costa Rica in a brothel that was turned into a children's daycare center. Don't you love that? I've seen it in a drug dealer named Harry who became the protector of that church. I've seen it in a guy named Joe whose house we worked on in Alabama who almost shot me one time, but again, that's a story for another day. But who said at the end of the week, I don't know what God sent you here, but whatever God that is, I want to believe in that one. I've seen it. I've seen the miraculous work of God made known in lots of people's lives in lots of different ways. We saw it a couple of weeks ago as our softball team got to perform CPR on a guy who was dead and gone and is now alive because of it. The storms in the last few weeks that have happened on Sundays kind of pulled this memory out of 14-year-old Adam's brain. When I was 14, I went on choir tour with our church. I wasn't actually in the choir because our choir director said, you can't sing and you can't dance. Have you thought about doing tech? That sounds great. So we went on choir tour, and we went up through, out of Florida, went up through Alabama, went up into Kentucky, came back home. But when we were in Alabama, this was June of 1994. And we stopped in a little town in Alabama called Piedmont, Alabama. And in 1994, we were there in June to do some recovery work from a F4 tornado that had ripped through that town back in March. It came through that town on Palm Sunday, as many churches were gathered. One of the churches was Goshen United Methodist Church. And after we did the recovery work, we got to go up to Goshen United Methodist Church, and we got to see, at that point, really just the foundation. Because that tornado took the roof off of the building and dropped it back down, collapsing the walls in on the congregation. 20 people died that day, including the pastor's 4-year-old daughter. We got to meet with Kelly Clem, who was the pastor of that church. And she shared the story of what had taken place. And the tornado came through on Palm Sunday. She buried her daughter on Wednesday. And on Sunday, they had Easter service in the parking lot. Somebody from the group asked her, how did you do that? She said, we needed Easter. We needed Easter. It was the only thing that we had. What other story brings life out of death? We had to see Jesus in the midst of the rubble. I'll tell you what, that messes with a 14-year-old boy's brain. But it's the reason that I believe that resurrection is possible. That we can see the miraculous anywhere. That we can see God at work, even in the most difficult of moments. Do you know what they did with the place where the church originally was? They moved a couple of blocks down the street. They built a new church eventually, and they turned the old facility into a memorial garden. Because the garden is the promise that there's a gardener. And that gardener invites us into new life. Into a life that says, stop staring at the tomb. I'm tired. I'm tired of staring in the tomb. I'm tired of staring in the tomb and thinking that life will somehow be different because of it. I'm tired of staring in the tomb and assuming that the world will get better because of it. I'm tired of keeping my heart locked up so tight for fear of being hurt. Easter invites us to turn around, to see Jesus in the brokenness, in the hurt, to see Jesus with his scars from the cross. The cross happened, but it isn't the end of the story. Because there is resurrection. There is possibility if we will just turn around, turn from our assumptions that things are bad. Turn from the tomb and allow Jesus to unlock the doors of our hearts that we've kept locked for fear for so long. And experience a peace that invites us to engage the world around us, to engage the brokenness with the peace and the wholeness and the possibility and the love and the grace and the comfort and the hope of a resurrected Savior. Death has done all that it can do. But Jesus invites us to new life. Now and forever. And if we'll stop staring at the tomb and get busy following Jesus, the world will never be the same.